Oh, heck yeah. Danley, we're in Sheridan, Wyoming on a Friday night.
God's country.
And you brought whiskey.
I did.
It's a cowboy move of you, sir.
I do my very best. I got my best cowboy boots on, which is to say, my only cowboy boots.
I went cowboy boot shopping with my grandmother for Christmas this year. And it was one of the coolest things. She's from Kansas.
Nice.
And we were in the cowboy boot shop, a.k.a. Boot Barn. And
it's in the name.
It is in the name. It's a very very self-explanatory shop to be in. But I was trying them on, and my grandpa was like one of the coolest individuals I've ever met in my entire life. Snap-up shirts, big handlebar mustache, Stetson cowboy hat, like the whole deal. He's from Nebraska. And I'm wearing Vans in the store, throw some boots on, walk around, and I come back, and my grandma's got this little smirk on her face. And she goes, you walk differently with a pair of boots on.
What every man wants to hear.
Yeah, something like that. I was like, you know what, Grandma? I think these ones are my boots. Let's get these ones.
They find you. That's how it works.
They do. So I've got a question for you, man. You've got thousands now of posts on your Instagram. The most recent one said, "Slow down, be here."
Yeah.
What does that mean?
The funny thing is I re-encountered that. I keep like a collector's notebook. I call it that, just for like catching stuff through life. And every once in a while I'll go and look at the old ones. And I was looking through an old one, and it was like some abandoned sketches of that phrase in there. And it just felt like a nice little serendipitous moment of reminding myself of that very thing, like to slow down and be super present, to just like let all the... Yeah, to me, it just means like we live in such a fast-paced time, and I think we feel the pressure to be fast-paced. So we need like literal physical word reminders of slow down and be here every once in a while, just to be like, where are you? What are you doing? Who are you? What's going on in your life? How do you sort of check in with that?
Yeah.
And make sure that you're not just speeding off into the future.
What place were you in where it made you go back and look at some of those old, what do you call them? Collector's
notebooks.
Collector's notebook.
I mean, ironically, it's probably that it was a little bit of panic, okay, shoot, I gotta do something. A sense of like, I haven't posted in a minute. I need to come up with some content. Where do I find some content to do stuff? So going back, that is the blessing of having those notebooks, is knowing that I'll have some things that I've left like breadcrumbs for myself in the future. And naturally I'm like, well, there it is. This sort of course corrects me from having this mindset of like, shoot, I need to do something right now. For sure.
I think I was extra interested in it too, because like the time of the year that you put it out to, like right at the beginning of the new year and all that stuff. It's an interesting time because I think people like approach the new year in so many different ways.
Totally.
I'm curious, what's the new year like for you, and how do you look at it? How do you approach it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it varies year over year. I know, so last year was the first year that I started building my business and being out on my own. So there was a lot more, I think like I had a lot more of that nervous excitement, a very like, okay, this is the start of the year, start of a business, all engines go, let's make stuff happen. And it was a nice optimistic time too. Not that I'm any less optimistic this year, but for some reason it was a lot more mellow right off the bat, just being like, oh, we're still sort of like coming off of the Christmas high, and it's like January 3rd or something before I knew it. Like it didn't carry all the same symbolic weight of last year. So it was almost like, oh, it is new. I guess I should do something about the fact that it's new. I think that's the vibe that it really took on for me this year, which I'm not mad about. I think there's a part of me that likes to get, thinking about, oh, what should it be? What's the expectation that somebody should have for the new year? And this feels like a year that just sort of unintentionally upended that.
Yeah.
By being like, oh yeah, we're in it. Just keep going, figure something out.
Is there something that's peaceful about that?
I think so. It's like a lot of the anxiety, if there's a degree of anxiety that I feel right now here at the like middle of January, it's from confronting the sense of like, shouldn't I be more like hectic right now? Shouldn't I be more like, oh, set your resolutions, come up with a goal, create a recap for the year, you know, all those expectations. And so I think I conjure some of the anxiety, but when I'm not thinking about that, it is pretty sad.
Yeah, it's interesting too for me when I look at the New Year stuff, because it's this year is one of the, I don't know if heaviest is the right word for it, but I feel like so much happened last year. Sure. Where maybe not as much of looking forward into this year, but more reflecting back on the one that just happened. Feels like something that is maybe like super present for me right now, and I don't feel like I've had a chance to do it yet. And so it's, you know, I've had years where I sit down and I'm like, you know, same kind of mode you're in, like, okay, so everybody's got these goals, and, you know, you're supposed to say, okay, well,
here's
you know,
a checklist.
I'm going to make this much money this year, and this is going to be my body fat percent, and I'm going to travel to this many places. And dude, I've done that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've had so many years where I do that because it feels like, well, that's just what you're supposed to do, like write a checklist.
Yeah, and then sometimes you have the energy for that too.
Right.
It's like, all right, let's do this.
Yeah, and so this year, I think that in the new year, I was just like, I really want to just make sure that last year was captured, because there's, you know, I was talking to my buddy, and he was telling me about this really difficult time that he had, and he said that he just resented. It was his dad. It's like, I resented my dad so much because I went back home. I was working with him in the real estate company. I was doing all of this different stuff, and it was nothing that I was promised. And it was so difficult for me because, I set my life aside to come do this because I thought that there was going to be this result.
Right.
And he was like, I wouldn't talk to my dad. I wouldn't do this, that, and the other thing. And, he said that once he journaled about it, that's what allowed him to let it go, because he was like, what I found was that I kept on holding to that resentment, and I kept on holding to all of that stuff because I felt like I didn't want to lose it. Like, I didn't want to not remember that lesson. I didn't want to let myself get hurt like that again. So I kept on holding on to it as a reminder that, like, hey dude, don't let yourself get in this position again. But as soon as he journaled about it, he was like, it's captured, we can move forward.
Yeah. And so dude, that's a great like lesson right there for like the importance of the journaling.
For sure. And that's, I mean, it's been, I don't think that I wrote my journal from like maybe New Year's last year until maybe like September, October this year.
Easiest thing to not do.
Oh man. And half of my journal entries start with, well, look at this. It's been another 10 months since I've been here.
I'm so bad at this thing.
I just have to get those first 3 lines out, and then it's good to go. But
that's right. But
yeah, there's been something about that's resonated with me this year. It's just like, I want to capture all of the stuff that happened so that then I can like, okay, that is saved. We can remember those emotions, those lessons, those letdowns, those heartbreaks. And then like, let's just go.
It's a beautiful, like, letting go. It's almost like you do get to let it go in a sense, even though it is captured there.
For sure. Do you think with the, with your particular style of art, do you think that there's something that is, a little bit journal-like about it?
Yeah, I would say definitely the fact that it's like word-based so heavily. The thing on my mind is always I'm trying to figure out if this is true ever since I started posting like lettering art on Instagram. But I know certainly in more recent years, one thing that I always try to tell myself is like, don't post just because you feel the pressure to post, which is kind of funny, like based on what I was just saying about that right. sense with this last piece of like, oh, well, maybe it's time. Maybe I gotta go do something. And I'm glad again that it was that phrase, because it reminded me of this sort of unspoken arrangement I have with myself of, I don't want to ever be in a place where I feel like what I'm putting out into the world is coming from the pressure to do it, as opposed to from a place where I feel like I have something to say. And for that to be something that's true of the moment that I'm doing it. So I think in that sense, the ability or the way that it's centered around a moment in time and what I feel is worthwhile to put out there, I think it has that journal vibe to it for sure.
Kind of captures like maybe like the headspace that you were in, or the things that you were thinking about at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's true whether it's like, whether I'm going for something deep or something really goofy. And I'm just like, is this sort of an authentic thing to where I am. And that's also incidentally, like I don't end up posting a lot of my paid work on the account. Like anytime that I work with someone, even if it's on a lettering based piece, it functions as a portfolio in some ways, but not in the way of being like, just finish this great project with so-and-so. I think because of that reason, where I want to preserve it as like, no, I just want this to be something that's stuff that was true in the moment and stuff that I either found fun or intriguing, or any number of like things that would be very honest to the exact moment that I'm posting, and not feeling like, okay, this is now a professional move that I need to do.
Right. Is that sense of, I'm going to keep the work that I put out into the world on Instagram and my portfolio, whatever, as something that is a reflection of myself and my own thoughts and not my necessarily paid work. Is that uncommon in the design world?
I think it is. I can't speak for everyone, but I do feel like the trend is that, it should be a place where you're putting out your professional work, like showing off, even if it's passion projects, the kind of stuff you want to be hired for. And I think that's wise, in a lot of ways, like it's the conventional wisdom, and it's because it's true. And in a lot of ways, like my account has functioned that way. Some of my best clients have been the ones who have looked at my page and been like, oh, these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. But I do think that there is a trap you can fall into that I think a lot of creatives who post their work on social media can fall into, where that sense of the obligation to make it that professional, portfolio piece first and foremost becomes a source of burnout when you don't feel like you can just use it as a sandbox and everything has to be beholden to, is this going to get me my next job?
Gotcha. Is that ever like a line or a boundary that you feel like you've ran into where you start to like be like, this might be we might be getting a little too professional here. Like we gotta bring some Dan back.
Let me think about that one. I think I've kept the sense of it being a very playful place pretty sacred. So I don't know that I've really felt that pressure of being like, oh no, it's getting too professional. Okay. I think at times I have the exact opposite. I'm like, I should reel it in.
Dude, every time
take me seriously.
Every time I see that you've spent the kind of creative energy and art that you have over like a Taylor Swift lyric, I'm just like, yes, get in there.
Guilty as charged.
It is awesome. So for the people who aren't familiar with your story, you said that you were coined the art kid of your family. That sounds like you've had a long journey with this thing. Tell me about, kind of where it started and how it's evolved over time.
Once I was born, and then from there, I couldn't stop drawing. The end.
And here we are.
One of the phrases I was telling you guys about earlier, the idea of just anytime I had something to draw on and something to draw with, as far back as I can remember, that was my go-to move. It was like, I don't even know if it was just fulfilling or just fun. Maybe both. I just couldn't stop. It was one of my favorite things to do. I just remember even one of my favorite stories is when I started first grade, my parents put us into a private school, and I was a little young for the grade because I think I was like a big reader. I loved words even then. Spoiler alert for the rest of my life. And I distinctly remember having to do like penmanship classes, right? Learning cursive, learning printing. And to me at the time, I just thought we got to draw all day. And that was so much fun.
As you were writing?
Oh yeah, because that's just drawing the letters. So I would be very meticulous. Like, this is going to be perfect.
I'm never letting you look at one of my journals and notebooks. There's not a whole lot of artistic ability
it's
going
art
into that.
In other ways.
Yeah.
My teacher was like, your son is a little printer. And I remember thinking like, joke's on you. I get to draw all day in this class, So ever since then, I think that's probably the roots even of becoming a lettering artist, was just always thinking about the act of depicting words or letters as a form of art. And that was only exacerbated when, Microsoft Word 97 comes onto the scene, right? And as a kid, you're discovering fonts.
Right.
like, whoa, this is an M, but this is also an M, you know?
Right.
I used to literally type words out, print them out, and then copy them. And that would be like my drawing I'm at the same time, right, still drawing stuff like dinosaurs and people and things. But
did you, so at this point, were you working with any brushes or calligraphy pens or anything like that? Or was it mostly like pen and pencil or crayons?
Mostly pencil. And then we had a massive pile of what we called just scrap paper from all the stuff that my parents were printing and didn't need. And then also, like, do you remember those like reams of paper that have the dotted edges that you can peel off? Oh, that was like the special paper.
Man, when you tore those out of a notebook though, and they had all that on the edge, it was just like
the worst.
Yeah, you could never clean it up.
Oh, but I loved just working with paper and pencil, because you can erase with pencil. And I think that was a big thing too, that being able to erase, it becomes almost like a sculpting project in the 2 dimensions. But my dad incidentally he used to, I think, do some calligraphy for fun briefly. And he had a bunch of calligraphy books, you know, from when he was younger. And those, you know, the first few pages of those would be about all the pens and the tools that you would use as a professional calligrapher. And I was like, I don't have any of that. I just have pencil. I'm going to fake it. And so that's how I accidentally discovered lettering, where you're like, not necessarily that amazing craft of just the writing in the beautiful strokes that calligraphy is, but sort of copying that with pencil, you know, filling in with, and learning the logic. I think that was a huge thing for my future lettering practice, learning the logic of upstrokes, downstrokes, what letters need to look like, where you make them bold, and why.
Interesting. So you almost got like a technical understanding of writing with a calligraphy pen without ever picking one up.
Absolutely. And it's not to say they didn't have any.
Right.
I think I just never was like, hey, parents, I would like to try this. I think I was like, well, I've got this.
Yeah.
So let me just have fun and do my own thing here.
Crazy. Okay. So so we're drawing dinosaurs and words.
Yeah, pretty much.
You said, we were talking before the show, you said that your brother was also drawing at the time. Maybe not as many.
My older brother.
Maybe not as many dinosaurs or words, but
I hope he listens to this, because I'm gonna call him out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're like 16 months apart, and so we're very close as kids. And he kind of he was the first, I think, to really. Well, I should say my parents were very encouraging of our creativity, which I think was super rad and has paid off dividends for our lives, certainly for mine. So we were drawing all the time, and we were encouraged to do so. And so my older brother sort of led the way, as oldest kids do. And so all the how to draw books we'd get, he would be the first to go through them. And so his dinosaurs, his ships, and he also got super into war battle formations really early, and so he would draw those diagrams as well. Nice. But anyway, he had this ability to just do the technical so well that I felt maybe not as good at for a long time. So in my mind, it was like this race to catch up with him. I don't know when it happened or why, but I started to get branded, like you said, as the art kid, probably because I was just more voracious about it, just doing it all the time. And he eventually got to a point where he basically rage quit on drawing. He's like, oh, Dan's the art kid. All right, I'm done. And did that thing I think that kids sometimes do, where you just even if you're very talented, you get this sudden desire to troll the heck out of it.
Right.
And be like, I can't do that anymore. Look, I can only do stick figures. And so he just went off goofy stuff and be like, I can't draw anymore. And we're like, no, you can.
Right.
Draw for us. And then, so I guess the branding became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Was that something that you took pride in, was being the art kid?
I think so. It was a mixed bag, because I think especially for whatever reason, as a young boy, I felt like it was to the detriment of my sports life, if that makes sense. I found that I would far rather sit and draw stuff than go out and do football drills. It's another funny thing where I used to literally I got a little brother and a little sister as well. And so all four of us would, we'd have the typical go outside and play time. And so oldest brother, Nathan, he would want to run football drills because he was super into the NFL early. And my mindset was like, well, I'm not going to become a professional football player. Why do I need to learn how to catch this thing?
Why am I drilling?
Exactly. Like practicing for what? Right. Like the idea of hobbies, it's like, if we're talking hobbies, I want to be inside drawing right now.
For sure.
But I think like when I say it's a mixed bag, I think they're started to self-internalize some stories of like, well, I'm not as much of like a boy because I'm like, I love the art of art. I like doing these rather than like running around and diving for footballs. That's actually more the diving part that I was like, why would I endanger my life for this? I don't have a future in the NFL. Well, not with that mindset, Dan.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, that's funny because I really enjoy the idea of like a Renaissance man.
Yeah, yeah.
And what I love about everything that I love about the idea of being a Renaissance man seems like it's very tricky to navigate when you're young, right?
Absolutely.
Because I mean, even let's even say like junior high school, there is that peer pressure, societal pressure, or whatever to be like, okay, here are the things that are like conventionally cool.
Yes.
And as soon as you get outside of that, now it's like, I don't know, like, how much of a dude are you really?
Right.
So,
like, here's your lane. You better stick with it, and like do everything that people expect. If you're gonna be like the theater kid, if you're gonna be the art kid, if you're gonna be the sports kid,
right? Because it makes sense,
right? It's easy to parse.
Such an easy box to put people in, and it's funny because I feel like as like outcasting as that can be when you're younger and all of those things, I feel like that same level of energy flips at some point, and I don't know when that is, and it's like those become the people
cruel, man.
Who it's cool like trick. It's so aspirational to be like, holy shit, he does something that's so unique and he's all about it and all this stuff. But it's also the exact same thing that as a kid and all of that stuff you're being told isn't cool,
right? And
isn't all of these things. So like, was there a shift for you that happened where it was like, oh man, this is like this is something this isn't something I need to run from. This is kind of my secret sauce.
Oh, I'm sure there was at some point. I mean, I think it's I feel like my life is a great testament to the idea that like sometimes like you can think what you like about passion, but it kind of catches up to you no matter what. Like I couldn't quit drawing and doing art.
Passion catches up to you. What do you mean by that? Passion catches up to you?
I mean, like, you can try to divert yourself from it. I think that's kind of like where my higher education story probably comes in pretty well. Like I went to Drexel University, got a chemical engineering degree, and that is obviously the path to take to become a graphic designer and illustrator like I am today.
Just the old bait and switch.
Yeah, surprise. Everyone do the same thing. That's the advice for today. I think that just marked like a very nice, tangible like lesson of how like you can't actually escape passion sometimes. Like you can't major your way out of it. You can't good advice your way away from like the things that you're called to do and that your soul kind of resonates with. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a very stubborn creative and that's like a stubborn creative thing to do. Be like, art will win in the end. But I mean, yeah, I just feel like I spent so much of my, I think, youth and young adulthood trying to be like, okay, well, I need to be as well-rounded as possible. And I need to try to do the right conventional thing. And then in the end, it becomes a story of like becoming an artist anyway against all like the choices that I otherwise would have made.
Interesting. One of my favorite concepts that one of the guys that I used to work with always said, and similar story, he went to private school, got sent out to, an out-of-state school, all-male boarding school, the whole thing.
Nice.
But one of his biggest takeaways that he used to tell me about all the time was that they preached constantly that people should strive to be well lopsided.
Well lopsided.
And that's one of my favorite ideas, because somebody who's well-rounded might start to fall into that like jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
To be all in on one thing would be like a real pointy, like needle sort of thing. And that's not great for everything. But what I loved about the idea of being well lopsided is that you might have a group or like a specific set of things that you're really good at, but you still got something on the other side of that bubble where it's like, you know, you've got a background in engineering, or you've got a background in sports, or in all these different things that I think makes you, maybe not even just more of an interesting person, but maybe a more well-equipped person as you like go out into the world.
And I think like I feel like empathy is a really big topic nowadays. Just the idea of like the skill of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think that falls like right in line with that. If you're able to be well lopsided by that definition, I think you're activating parts of your brain that allow you to understand how people who are not passionate in the same things you are still can approach the world or see things. And it's almost like a little shortcut for, okay, I can understand as an artist how an engineer might approach this thing, you know?
Right. Being as passionate as you are about what you do you find yourself particularly drawn to other people who are like, have that fire about certain things themselves too? Like when they've got the same level of passion as you do, even if it's not with art?
No, they're weird.
Weirdos, only artists.
Who does that? That's terrible. I think I do feel that, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've ever really thought about like being drawn to that, but I think that I do admire it. And honestly, like seeing what people who are obsessed with the thing and find ways to make the thing work, whatever that thing is in their life, I do feel like a sense of kinship with those people. And I feel like they make for, especially like for great conversation partners.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And that's, I mean, I would imagine that that's got to be back to the empathy thing, something where, I mean, that's your story, right?
I think so. I mean, I'd like to think so.
So far, so good.
I'm very passionate. Yeah. I mean, I think the nuance of life is something that I feel gets lost in a lot of the messaging that we expose ourselves to through social media, through this like super, content heavy age that we live in. The idea that things, even as we're exposed by the internet to more and more aspects of society and people in the world, it's almost like maybe as a counterbalance to that, we tend to retreat to easier like labels and concepts of how things should be and what people should do. And so anything that reminds me or that like shows that nuance of life, that it's not ever just one thing, and somebody who breaks out of that mold and is interesting in that way, I just find very compelling. I'm
with you. And I think one of the biggest struggles that I've had is I really dove down what I love has been coined as like the hustle porn culture.
Oh yeah. Dude, rise and grind, baby.
Rise and grind. 4 a.m. cold plunge, or else you're a loser.
Make sure you film yourself doing it.
Yeah, you have to.
Or it didn't happen.
But I mean, so much of, I grew up, I wouldn't say dissimilarly, but the same passion or similar passion that you had for art, I had for sports. And I grew up, and eventually that passion existed, but also shifted to becoming like a means to an end.
Right.
And as part of that, I set this goal that I wanted to go to college and graduate without debt and do all of these things that were like, I'm setting myself up for a great future. Yeah. Some of those things did work out, and like, yes, I'm glad that I did them. But I just completely honestly fell out of love with it. And I fell so much into that like hustle porn, like, hey, I was doing 2 workouts a day. I was always eating right. I wasn't going out. I wasn't doing all this stuff.
Here's your ticket to success.
Exactly. And so I think that I bought so heavily into that because, even my dad used to tell me when I was young, he's like, you're going to have to work harder than the next guy because you're an average white kid from Idaho. And I was like, respect. Let's go do some sprints. But I think that the lesson that I took from that was like, I can achieve and accomplish whatever I want to, but I'm going to have to like make the work the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of making the work the thing in a positive way where it's like, hey, let's fall in love with this and like enjoy the journey, instead of that, I just became like, how can I be as militaristic about this as possible?
Yeah.
So that I can like be like, okay, I checked that box. I must be on the right path. And so to your point, like being able to find people who have found their passion and just been like, okay, let's just turn that into the thing.
Did you ever watch what is it? Whose Line Is It Anyway? That old improv show with Drew Carey.
Nope.
Okay, that's my advice to you. It's so funny.
Okay.
But the main reason I bring it up is one of the ways they always introduce the show. It's the format is like 3 or 4. This is I think from like the 2000s. 3 or 4 improv performers, and they just do improv for TV. It's very good. But they would always introduce the show. Drew Carey would introduce the show being like, welcome to Whose Line Is It Anyway, where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. And they stuck to that like format. Is very funny. But that line in particular, I feel like has come to represent like so much of what I feel like is just true about, especially being an entrepreneur. And I do think that there's a degree to which, you know, you learn things about people, you learn things about the systems that we live in, but even as you learn those and what it takes to succeed there, I think there's still a deeper truth that so much of it is made up and the points that we use don't matter. And it's like it starts off being kind of scary or hilarious, and then it becomes very comforting when you realize, oh, okay, pursuing my passion also doesn't mean I have to step in the exact ways that someone else pursuing this passion found their success in. Because I think it's almost like the first trap that you can fall into once you free yourself of that. I should say the second trap. You free yourself from the first trap of like the checklist and the hustle porn. And you're like, I can pursue my passion. And what's the first thing we do? We look for someone else who did the same passion and how they did that. And we're like, okay, I got to follow this rule book now. This is how to make your living as an artist on your own now. And to me, my whole journey is so random to me, looking back in the best possible way, where I'm like, I'm so glad I stuck to a few, key things, and then like released the fact that I wasn't doing it as conventionally, because the journey that it took me on was so much more fun to talk about at parties. Yeah. I
became so much more interesting in the cocktail hour.
And it's because, like for better or worse, I couldn't even when I tried to do things conventionally. And so once I accepted that, I was like, oh, okay, so we actually are all figuring this out as we go.
What did that look like for you when you decided to be done with the conventional route and you just decided like, hey, let's chase this passion, whatever that means. Let's just go in that direction.
The funny thing is, I don't know that, even as I'm describing that that's a path I took, I don't know if I ever at some point in my life sat down and said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to eschew the conventional path and strike out on my own. I think it was a lot of like begrudgingly going with, I feel like this is what I need to do right now, taking into account like all the things I know about myself, taking into account all the conventionalism I'm given, knowing that there needs to be a decision that I make. And like, I think it just boiled down to a series of making decisions that scared me probably. And like, I don't think that that's necessarily the like template for life. I think fear does exist to make sure you're not jumping off cliffs.
Right.
But I think in other ways, like there are some fears that are there to be analyzed and to be thought about, as opposed to be like serve as the direction for your life, if that makes sense.
For sure.
And I'm not saying like I'm a master at knowing which is which, but I think especially when I was younger and had more energy for it, I'm really glad that I chose the paths of like, a lot of my fear right now is probably just because I'm young and haven't done this before. So let me see how scary it really is. And if like there's something further down that tells me to stop. So I think like one of the best examples of this was like in high school, learning that I was terrified of public speaking and learning that a lot of people are afraid of public speaking. I'm like, okay, so this is probably not valid. to just like not do. If this is just true of everyone, and yet there's a lot of like public speakers and they do well, right? Like that seems to be a good thing to be able to do in life. So what I chose to do was really lean into that and be like, what are the things at school right now that would force me to confront this? So I signed up for the trifecta of, is it trifecta? Maybe it was just two. No, it was three. Mock trial team, the drama team, and debate team. And it was a really good way of encountering like rock bottom really fast. I still remember, ironically, at Drexel University, where I ended up going to school, we had a debate tournament. And that was where I had my first like moment of stepping up to the mic, thinking I was prepared and absolutely blanking. Now, the funniest thing about this scenario is I was debating like a very shy, extremely like soft-spoken guy, and there are two maybe like freshman girls who were volunteering for this high school thing.
Okay.
But at that moment of blanking in front of these three people, I felt like my life was over. You know, it's just like, could it possibly be any worse than this? But I think that was also just the best possible scenario for that, because the thoughts that come in right after that is like, okay, we screwed that up, but we keep going. You have to keep going. There are more rounds of this debate thing. You just have to pick yourself up and go on. And then obviously in retrospect, being like, that was like the safest possible place to fail.
For sure.
But to confront that like overwhelming sense of like, this is how it feels to fail, and realize, oh, I still go, and I still can find a place in myself to motivate myself to move on. That was super empowering. And that's why I'm like, I'm so glad I got that lesson young, you know, and just by leaning into what was terrifying to me at that time.
Got you. So we were talking again, you know, before we started recording, and you were talking about how, you know, after going the conventional path, you were knocking on the door of like, hey, we're going to get the big job in engineering.
Oh yeah. Chemical engineer.
Everyone thought would be awesome. And we're going to go work for Sam Adams and do all this cool stuff. And then it sounded like you had another one of those moments where you're like, you know what? I'm just going to full send it. I'm going to go off the cliff and build the plane on the way down. What was that like once you decided to have one of those moments with your career and with your passion?
It really sucked at first. I think as I was telling you guys, like this scenario where a recruiter was guiding me through the very earliest stages of, okay, you might be a candidate for this position in chemical engineering, which is everything I've been working for the past 5 years of school. And I just had like an intense physical reaction to it. I don't think I had the vocabulary at the time to be like, I'm having a panic attack. It was like a protracted, like several hours of just, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't really function. And I couldn't even link it to like, is this because I feel like I want this job or don't want this job, or like my life is over? It just felt like a strong sense of, you cannot go down this road any further. And I think in that moment I decided, okay, I got to give Art Dan a chance again. I think it's Art Dan's last stand. Like, let's give this thing a shot, even if it goes against everything conventionally that I've even like have been telling myself to do, which really, I feel like that was the most amount of pressure, was some version of me saying, no, you've got to see this thing through. You've already invested so much time, energy, et cetera, into it. And then at the same time, this sense of like, we've got to try something else. And again, like, so grateful that I listened to that voice and called up the recruiter. Like, no go. Left him to probably as like 2,000 other graduates vying for the position. So they were probably fine. But in that moment, it felt like such a dramatic thing again, like for me to have done. And then the immediate aftermath of that being, okay, now that I've done that, it feels like I've put a stake through the heart of this conventional career move. Now what's left is to really give it all I've got on this like graphic design and art side and just see what happens.
Got you. Was there any, you had the physical reaction of panic, like this might be the end of Art Dan. Art Dan,
he's gone forever.
Maybe dying
in a brewery of all places.
We almost
drowned him in beer.
We almost drowned Art Dan and Sam Adams. Did you have any similar, whether it was like a mental relief or physical relief, once you decided to axe that path? Did you have any sense of relief or excitement to say like, okay, that road is closed. We put the road closed sign here. Like now we're going to go do this other thing.
Yeah. I think having those brief moments of certainty of doors closed is one of my favorite things in life. I feel like I'm not a big fan of waiting around for certainty in general, because I feel like it's either psychotic moments of like absolute assurance where there shouldn't be, or naivety, or like being weirdly hubristic about it. But I think when a door is closed and you feel that, like to your point, like the relief that came through of like, all right, I may not know exactly where I'm going next, but I know where I'm not going. And the brief like illumination that provides is very nice.
Do you, have you been on the same general path since then?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, like I alluded to earlier, there's sort of been a sense of randomness to the trajectory that my life has taken. But in like the trajectory of art and creativity, like that's sort of been like the thing that I've always been able to say it's going to be around this somehow.
Right. We're shooting towards that North Star and we'll end up somewhere close to that.
I'm just going to keep drawing.
Was there so once you closed that chapter, did you feel a sense of pressure towards, okay, now I have to balance the business side of art and now I have to balance the passion side of art? Like how the heck do you go, okay, well I still have groceries to pay for.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah, I think that's probably the blessing of having been as young as I was, is like, you still have some of the energy and naivete of like, okay, I'm going to make this work somehow. And an important part for sure was being able to move home and ask my parents to do the most millennial thing ever for me. And like, hey guys, can I take a gap year here? And I promise I'm going to use that to brute force my way into graphic design or bust. Like if that doesn't work, then I will look at engineering another time as my backup plan, as one does. And they were very cool about that. And I don't want to take that privilege for granted, like having the space with my parents being supportive enough to be like, yeah, we just, our hopes for you were to use your educational years to be well-rounded because it's a safe environment for that, right? Like you're surrounded by an artificial school environment. You have people whose jobs are to shepherd you through that. And so they were like, if you guys are, to the kids, if you guys are gonna do this education, maybe just use that opportunity to be as well-rounded in all the areas that you can. But once you're done with that, sky's the limit, go out into the world. So having their support, that was huge. And then from there, I think it was just like, it was using my network and building my network, whether or not I would have used those words at the time. Like the idea of other people while venturing out on this like very solitary thing, I think that was such a good and necessary component of, like I had a very strong sense of I need to talk to people in this industry. I need to reach out to the people that I know, and I need to start somehow getting myself out there. So that's where Instagram came in handy back when it was still coming in handy for people, right. When the algorithm liked us. I just started posting art on there, mostly lettering art. So hence the Dan Drawn Words account. And I'm doing this like in parallel with, looking for people who in my life who needed graphic design work and getting in touch with people who knew other graphic designers that I could engage with. One of my favorite examples of that, my cousin's aunt on my dad's side, Maria, she works to this day at EA Games in Vancouver. My cousins talked to her on my behalf and got us connected, and I went up and spent a week with her and her family, and she was so wonderful. She brought her graphic design friends and her concept artist friends for like dinners at her house to meet me, look at my portfolio, give me advice.
Wow.
And because there was also a point where I was unsure whether I was going to go like a formal graphic design route or if I wanted to go into like the concept art illustration side. I'd graduated from just letters and dinosaurs to getting really obsessed with like portraiture and character art. So I was doing a lot of like people, and that still is my default. If I sit down with like a blank sketchbook and I'm not lettering, I'm probably drawing a face.
Are you doing like realism portraiture? Or are you doing cartoon?
Kind of a combination of both. Okay. I think I loved the idea of like maybe again, like finding a well-roundedness in that respect. Cause I think the skills to do both, it exercises such fascinating different sides of your creative brain.
Yeah.
You know, like whether you want to do something very well traditionally representational, or you want to do something that's like unique but caricature or cartoon, it's like same but different, you know? And so I just enjoyed that challenge too. Like because I think very early on when you are a kid who likes to draw people, you're almost going for hard mode because every one of your friends who's looking over your shoulder wants to tell you immediately, like, that doesn't look like them. Yeah. And you're like, I don't know why, but I know that that's true.
Right.
And so you're pushing yourself like, what does it mean to capture a likeness instead of just like, okay, there's a nose here and it's kind of this shape. But anyway, so there was that possibility. There's in another alternate universe. This is Dan, the concept artist, talking to you. But yeah, I got to meet these wonderful people from the film industry and from the graphic design industry in Vancouver. And her husband was a fantastic chef, and he would just make us these like gourmet meals. And I'm sitting there like, what is my life? I'm showing my little sketchbook to these people with like cold salmon with champagne sauce. And it was a wonderful week. And it was also just very empowering to me after that week, because all the feedback that I got from these professionals was like, you have the taste and you clearly have the skills to make it in this industry. You just need to find the experience. And it's one thing to kind of tell yourself that, and it's another thing to hear that from people who you know are successful in there, who have really no incentive besides politeness to like tell you that kind of thing. Right. But like the degree of authenticity to which they were like, this is what we would recommend that you do, but you're going to be capable of doing this. I mean, I think that was a life-changing moment right there. And then while the Instagram stuff started to take off, getting the attention and approval of other designers, I think that was also that was huge. Just understanding there's a community of people out here and they think I'm one of them, so I must be.
That's one of the questions that I have had since I found your work. I think I found your work right around 2 years ago. Oh, nice. It was right around the time that I met Brady, and I obviously love their stuff that they do at GoFast. And I was like, I noticed the continuity between a lot of the design and stuff. And so I started poking around. I was like, I have to know who's doing this stuff. And then I found your work through that a couple of years ago. Surprise, it's Dan. But one of the questions that I had as I saw a lot of your stuff is like, it's so consistent and it's so clearly you when you're doing this stuff. Like, I feel like I could see a design on the back of somebody's shirt that's not my company or GoFast and be like, I know who did that shit. But one of the things that it really brought out for me is like, creating can be a very isolating game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can be isolating in a great way where it's like, I feel like most of the time that I see your work that is in that style that you like post on your Instagram and stuff, it's like, I know that that's Dan's. On the flip side of that though, is it's like, I feel like that can be such an isolating game when you're doing your own stuff off in your own world. And I'm curious what kind of what kind of role community plays in being in a game where, like, at the end of the day, it's you sitting in front of a sketch pad, sitting in front of an iPad, like just creating by yourself?
Oh, dude, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of ways to answer that, so I'm just gonna think out loud here. I mean, one of the reasons I think that I kept going and maybe have built it to where I am today is because of community, because of people taking their initiative to reach out to me. You know, to the extent that I did some reaching out, like I described, I think it's still like the kindness of strangers that I have like secretly depended upon the whole time as well. You know, I had, there's a platform called Dribble that used to be like the height of, I'm sure it's still very good. I haven't been on in a while though. Used to be the height of like graphic design credibility because it was invite only for people who were in the community there to say, okay, I think this designer is worthy of the draft. It was like basketball themed. Right. So you got drafted. It was pretty sick. And so like there was a guy, and I wish I remembered his name. Thank you, Guy, who reached out because of my Instagram, shot me those invites, and I felt like I've made it somehow. And it actually kind of true, because that's the platform that Brady McLean found me on. He was working at Flood Marketing, the marketing company that he and Josh Law co-founded here in Sheridan. And so these guys from Sheridan found this guy from Philadelphia who is doing art in a style that they were specifically looking for. So, and you know, yet another stranger reaching out, like, and then other art friends. I have a friend of mine, Eric Friedenson, who's a fantastic artist in New York, who just became friends with me after following my work on Instagram, and invited me out to like a live art show that he and another artist were doing stuff at in New York. And so I went up there, we made that connection, and then we've been friends ever since. Just all these different sort of serendipitous moments of people choosing to use their platforms or what they had to reach out and kind of make my life better. And then I started going to a conference called Creative South, and I started going to that in 2016. Eric had invited me to a group of like, we're sort of like a mastermind group of fellow lettering artists, a bunch of guys who I think were involved in another lettering community, but they welcomed me in with open arms, and then they were all talking about this conference they were excited to go to. I think it was like I'm trying to remember. I don't know how old it was at that point. It might have been like 5 years of Creative South. But they're like, we got to meet up there in person, guys. So that was my first design conference. And I wrote a blog after that conference about that experience, because it was such an emotional, on the plane ride back from Creative South that first year, it was such an emotional moment of feeling like I'd found my people for the first time. You know, knowing that I'd interfaced with all these different artists and designers throughout my journey up to that point, but to spend like a few dedicated days with people who are just nerdy about the same things, and who, you know, I admired their work so much online, but we got to like hang out and do life together and just speaking the same language. It was such a profound moment. Like I just remember like crying on the plane, being like, this is a life-changing thing. And, you know, it's literally that. It's that community showing up for the people, and then almost like by having fun sneakily, like everyone's showing up for each other. It turns into something that becomes, it like cements a sense of my purpose, and just gave me like the fuel, the wind beneath my wings, to quote one of the best songs ever written, to just like keep going and pursuing this journey.
Would you say that was the big unlock for you that happened after that moment?
I don't know. I mean, I think it was one of them. I want to say, like, I don't know that there was like a single moment. It almost feels like that whole journey of breaking into graphic design and all the random little happenstance things was like a series of unlockings. And so like it was maybe the one that I felt like was the most community based.
Gotcha. Man, it's so cool to hear, because it's, I think that it's so easy, especially in art, you know, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but, owning a media company, it's so easy to be influenced in great ways by things that you see. Yeah. And it's also, easy to be influenced in ways that kind of like dilute your art or dilute your voice or something like that. And so, it's so cool to hear that community for you is something that is an unlock. It's something that is inspiring and all those things, because there's, you know, we work with tons of videographers, tons of photographers, tons of graphic designers. And what's interesting is that, you know, some of the things that are quote unquote inspiring is like, well, shit, now there's a new Instagram trend and they're doing these kinds of reels. So I guess we have to get
on that train.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to use film burns for the next 6 months. And so like, there's like, you know, it's one of those things where it's like community and maybe
compared
not
to like groupthink.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm curious, like when it comes down less on the emotional side, but more on the art side, it doesn't seem like you've let the community dilute your art or maybe influence in a way that takes away like your secret sauce. But I'm curious if that's something that you've ever felt a pull either way towards.
Yeah. Oh no, definitely. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about was like, I've gotten a lot of success through being like an internet person, but I've never actually ever gone viral. And to date, I'm so grateful for that. And I feel like in some ways it's turned me into this sort of anti-viral, like in my mind, there's this resistance to the idea of it because it, you know, to the thing we were talking about earlier with nuance, I think that it can strip the nuance out of things if you're chasing what is going to satisfy what, you know, these companies have arbitrarily decided, or even if it's not a conscious decision, have designed the system to reward, which is not inherently aligned with like what is the most creative, what is the most beneficial, what is the most true at any given point. It's just what, you know, you can often find excellent or hilarious or rage-inducing things through viral algorithms. Like that's what they're designed to elevate. But like as an end unto itself, it doesn't guarantee that your business is going to thrive. It doesn't guarantee that your mental health is going to improve. It doesn't guarantee that the audience you've reached is the audience you want to reach. In fact, I think it does the exact opposite and exposes a lot of creators to like degrees of fame or negativity that previously might have been, you know, the purview of celebrities in a movie. Things that like no human is truly equipped to deal with. And so I'm always like, well, if I never go viral, I'm not going to be mad at that at all. Like if my piece reaches 250 of the people that share my values or might be inspired to go do something that I'm passionate about wanting to inspire, I can be content with that. And I think that's just like a conviction that I've come to over time, but only because of, I think, to your point about like having that struggle and having that pool, there have been times, you know, where it's like, well, I wish this had performed better. You know, these people are going viral. That seems really cool. But having the benefit of always observing that from a distance, I think that's what's given me the ability to be like, oh, that's not always a good thing. In fact, that's often a bad thing. And so I think by using the extreme of virality, it's helped me to look at just trends in general too, and being like, when is a trend an indicator of something that's necessary to adapt to? And when is it something that's simply just that, like a hip moment for our attention spans that people are resonating with for whatever reason?
Absolutely. Have there been any moments where you felt like you've had to follow, you said that some of those trends are things where it's like, no, we actually have to adjust to this. It's not a fad or something that's going to dilute my art. Have there been any of those moments in your career where it's just like, hey, this is just an adaptation I'm going to have to make?
That's a great question. I don't know if that's been true of my art so much as maybe business practices or, I feel like my art has, for whatever reason, thankfully, I feel like I've been able to maintain it as like this sacred side thing that is driven almost completely by what I think is fun and cool. And that I think what I've learned is that the things that I've found to be fun and cool, maybe I am fortunate that they often intersect with things that do align with like business trends and practices. Like people do enjoy hand lettered stuff, especially for like merch. And so I'm like, well, twist my arm. I'll right. do that for that, I don't think I've ever really felt a moment where it's like, okay, better compromise my design eye for this. There is in design, there's that give and take with clients where, if you can't capture the vision or you can't persuade them that your take is the way to go, it tends to be like Frankenstein a little bit. But I think what I told myself early on is there is always going to be a line where you can compromise up to that line as an artist and designer and no further to like accomplish what the client wants. And the challenge is to find that without, saying, okay, I'm giving you everything you want and I'm going to, even though I don't believe in any of this. Like I always think that there is a way to say, okay, that first take wasn't good. That second take probably wasn't it for you, but I'm never going to just say, all right, whatever. I'll just give you exactly what you want, even though I hate this, And I think that's an easy thing, especially when you're a burned out designer, to tend to like, just do like, let's get this over with. I'm just gonna like, and then you end up with something you don't like, and maybe the client isn't super inspired by either. But I've learned that there's, no matter how it will feel, I think there's always that line that you can make where it still satisfies you to a certain extent, that you haven't given up your professional opinion and like what you still think, it's not your favorite, but that it gets the job done and still like performs creatively. If that makes sense. No,
for sure. Do you, kind of what I'm hearing there though, is that it's like, there is a give and take between like, there's this business case and there's this vision that we have, and we need whatever you create to make sure that it fits into our thing, whatever that is. And then you've got this skill set and your flavor and all of this stuff. And there's somewhere in the middle, there's harmony, maybe.
Totally.
What I get curious about though, listening to that, is that I'm curious if that's something that many designers feel like they have to earn, right? Or, because even just being a business owner, right? There are, especially in the early days, there's that phase where it's like so many people have to say yes to anybody who has a checkbook, right? And it's like, okay, I'm doing this thing and you're willing to pay for that thing. And we, in another world and in this world, probably aren't a great match. But the fact that you have money and you're willing to give it to me to do the thing means,
and I need that money.
Exactly. And so, speaking for myself, when I first started the media company, it was like, we said yes to projects and to people and things like that now we probably would choose not to work with because it wasn't a great fit. We could have referred them to somebody better, and, whatever that fit could have been. But it felt like through us, cutting our teeth and like learning some of those lessons and doing some of that stuff, it felt like for me that I had to earn the ability to say, hey, this is probably not going to be a great fit, but I feel like there's this other person that could do it. Or yes, we'll say, for sure we'll do this, but here's kind of where our line is.
Right.
So I'm curious for you, is that something where you just knew where that line was right out the gate, or did you kind of have to like, learn a couple lessons on your way to getting there?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's a bit of a both and, I think that it was like clear to me pretty early on that my almost like from a duty perspective, like my purpose as a designer is that I am going to have to provide this creative value and be persuasive enough to make sure that that line doesn't get crossed. I think that was a conviction that I had pretty early for, this is how I need to make sure I get the job done. I will not cross a line where I'm just like, this is absolute rubbish, but they wanted it, so I'm just gonna do that to get paid. And so I think it like activated all those persuasive skills. And so I don't think that I ever had to like truly encounter a situation where it was, okay, compromise, let's just get this over with, right? So maybe in that way, I was pretty fortunate. And at the same time, I think there were a lot of situations where in retrospect, you're like, that was not a good fit. I learned from this what not to do in the future, what kind of client red flags tell me that either I should give this project to someone else or, just whatever it takes to say, this isn't going to be for me. So I think like learning that skill early on, just from observation, it protected me from having to like learn it the hard way, if that makes sense.
Got it. What would you recommend to somebody who might be early in their design career, or let's just say artistic career, right? Because that could be photography, it could be, you choose. But what would you recommend to some of those people to, learn those lessons in a similar way that you did, where maybe you didn't have to hit a lot of those barriers and learn those lessons the hard way?
I think number one, the community aspect. I think that would be huge, because so much of our lessons, I think, even if we can't pinpoint what they all are sort of secondhand, that we've probably picked up from people who have made those mistakes and told us early at some point what not to do. And so we never find ourselves going down that road in the first place. So I think just like having the humility early to absorb as much of that advice as possible, find mentors, people who have been down those roads, because there might be some wisdom you don't even realize you've absorbed that allows you never to make those same mistakes. Another thing that I've been really passionate about recently, especially as I've been, analyzing my journey and what I use my Instagram platform as, the idea of having a sandbox for yourself, and if you're a creative, a public sandbox, I think is so critical. Somewhere where you're not feeling like you're beholden to using it solely as a professional platform, but as a place to be expressive in the exact ways that you want to be with an audience. I think that's a critical component of it, because so much of the creative act, I think, is about communicating with other people. You want to tell the world something. You want to share something about how you see the world and why. And too often, I think we close off the advice around like personal projects as like, have a sketchbook somewhere, or make sure you're doing something fun for yourself. I think what we tend to forget to tell people is like, still be sharing that as publicly and as often as possible, because it is in the act of like having an audience and engaging with an audience that you find the satisfaction and the fulfillment that allows you, I think, to develop your skills and develop the taste and cultivate and keep the passion alive. Even if the work that you're doing that has to, where the question even of that compromise line comes up, that's not always your favorite. It can be, but often that's where you're learning the lessons about how to navigate client life and such. But if you're doing that and at the same time still doing what really fires you up, learning in public, your own style, messing up, but having the freedom because no one's judging it, I think that's so important. Man,
learning in public those words go really well together.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I mean, quite frankly, this podcast is my creative pursuit that I want to bring to the world.
There you go. Right on.
And I knew it was. I walked around. So brief tangent. I'll bring it back.
Let's go.
My mother's one of the sweetest people in the world.
This is a great start.
My mom's better than your mom. but your mom's probably awesome too.
That was not so great.
Not directed towards you, but just whoever's listening. I'll take my mom any day. She's got this hilarious thing that she does around Christmas where, once you get old enough, there's certain things where it's like, you can't just roll out a Tonka truck every Christmas and be like, there's another win 4 years in a row.
If only.
But she started doing this thing once we got old enough that she was like, hey, I know you want like this snowboard coat, but I don't really know like the size, the color, whatever. So like, I'm going to wrap up a box with like a picture of a snowboard coat in there. So you have something to unwrap and it's like, hey, you find it and I got you.
Yeah.
So she did that with podcast gear when I was in college. And
okay, your mom is better than a lot of moms.
Love you, Mom. And so I was excited about it. And I came around to Christmas again the next year and still hadn't bought it. And then I came around to Christmas the year after that and still hadn't bought it. And she was like, hey, dude, you need to order that. And I was like, okay, I will. And I knew what I wanted. I knew the setup. I knew all the stuff. I had done the research. But I think that I was giving myself the excuse of like, oh, I don't have a podcast. I don't have I don't have the gear yet, so I can't start it. And then the gear came in and there was one microphone instead of two. So I was like, well, you can't do a podcast with one microphone. And so I carried that equipment around for another year and a half.
Nice. And
didn't do anything with it. And what I found to be so interesting about that was like learning in public was what I wasn't willing to do. Mm-hmm. I would, there were so many things in my life where, I was an athlete and the product that I was putting on the field had years and years and years of preparation and practice and all these things. And like, I had this idea that everything that I put out into the world had to be in a finished form.
Debut perfectly.
And so, it wasn't until I sat down with my friend Clay, and we weren't particularly talking about podcasting. We were just talking about business and life and the struggles that come with both of those things. And we were like, hey man, we kind of look at the world similarly. And a lot of these conversations, this conversation that we're having, we've had with other people also, and we wish that more people could hear it. So I was like, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about starting this podcast thing. He's like, I want to start a podcast.
Funny story.
Yeah. So we did. And, the first episode was terrible. The content matter was amazing. The equipment was terrible. We had one camera, bad lighting, two little lapel mics, which for people who don't know what that is, it like clips onto your collar and it's not made for long form conversation. And then we had a little like desktop USB mic that somebody, instead of holding like this, had like facing away from them and they were talking away from the microphone so you couldn't hear shit.
Famously the point of the design.
Right. So it's not what you would call ideal circumstances. But we get, God, it was probably 7 episodes in. We finally started to like kind of get it.
Yeah.
But the thing that I love about us doing that together was like, we became each other's inspiration and accountability to be willing to learn in public.
Absolutely.
Where it's like, it doesn't matter if we have the perfect setup. It doesn't matter if we have the perfect guests, if we have the perfect questions, but we have to do this or else we're just going to sit here and ruminate about it and we're never going to do anything. And so, that learning in public thing for me is just like, it hits home so deeply because I'm like a recovering perfectionist.
Yes, sir. I feel like that's probably resonates with a lot of just creative types, like the idea of wanting to be out the gate. And I mean, the idea like first impressions matter. There's a truth to that, but I think we can take it to the extreme being like first impressions mean you get no second chances. And to like start out flawed means that's forever where you're stuck. And that's just not true. And also shout out, like, I think the phrase learning in public was introduced to me when I was doing the Leadership Wyoming course. There's a book called Gracious Space. Highly recommend. There's like 3 or 4 tenets. And one of them is that idea of learning in public. So I don't want to take credit for that phrase when I know it came from someone whose name I don't remember, but that is the book.
We'll add it to the reading list. One of the things that I wanted to bring up with you, from like reading the captions that you put under your post, from listening to podcasts you've been on, one of the things that really hit home with me was a conversation that you were having about burnout. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll start it with this. Have you gone through phases of your career where you felt burnout?
Absolutely. And there are always times where I'm just always wondering if am I just kind of like living in a low level of burnout constantly? I don't think that that's always true, but I think it's such an easy and familiar place to be, especially for someone like me who is prone to overthinking and to perfectionism. I think what I find is there are lots of periods in my life where I overperform. I'll go and try to be as useful as possible, like as if that is an end to itself to other people. And that's just the fastest ticket to burnout, because you can be a very capable, well-rounded person, but that doesn't mean that the things that you're capable of and well-rounded at are all giving you energy. And in fact, like if you're not taking the space and the time for the things that do, and you're living in like that red zone, you're gonna like emerge and be like, why do I feel like I have no passion in anything? Like I'm misaligned with what used to bring me joy, and just having or even being too tired to even have those conversations with yourself. I forget what the exact question was.
We were just talking about like if you had felt burnout before.
Yeah. Yeah. So that place of like questioning everything and being like, what is the point of me? I think I feel like that's usually a good sign that, okay, maybe you're burned out. Maybe you need to find room to breathe by saying no to something. And it's different for everyone. I would never want to prescribe like it's probably a relationship or it's definitely your job. Yeah. I think there are so many things that maybe is A right? One could be just bad for everybody. Like if you're in addiction, for instance, or like two things that are good, but you're just having too much of the wrong things or at the wrong time. So anyway, all that to say, like, I think there are a lot of causes, but I think you can identify it by just how you feel or what you're unable to do with yourself.
Right. Yeah, it's funny too, because it's, I think the tricky thing about burnout is there's a lot of times that, the symptoms are the same, but the cause is different.
Yeah. Right.
And there's, there have been a lot of times where I feel like I've signed myself up for it.
Yeah.
And I've, one of the tricky things that I've dealt with is every once in a while I'll get to a phase in the business where I'm like, okay, it's time to go get some clients. It's time to like ramp things up. Here we go. We're going to go be a business guy. And, naturally we get, a handful of clients in, we get really busy, things start to roll. And then all of the fun things that come with that mean that you're spending a lot of time doing the stuff. And it's really interesting because a lot of times I go into those phases knowing that that's what I'm signing myself up for, is like, hey, this is going to get busy. There's going to be a grind and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But I don't but like I accept it on the front end. And so that's something that I feel like I've been working on when it comes to burnout, is like, okay, how do we go into it knowing which variables and like which levers that we can pull to say like, okay, let's make this go better this time. Right. And I think that I haven't figured out the answer yet. Right. And maybe it's not going all in sometimes and like approaching things with a little bit better pacing, but, connected to the burnout thing, one of my favorite, collections of words that you've ever put together, is you're on a podcast and you said, when you're getting outside and when you're stepping away from things, whether it's for burnout or just for creative inspiration or whatever, you said, retreat to return, don't retreat to escape.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I would love to hear more about what that means for you.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. 'Cause I need to be reminded of that too. Like, oh yeah, too. That's right. Sweet. The phrase itself, I think, is sort of a combination of things that I learned, one from church camp and two from my therapist. And so I think the church camp context was this idea where our pastor was saying, like, it was the end of like a high. It's fun to get away and be with your friends and like learn all these things. And he was reminding us that you're not here away because this is like an asterisk in your life where your life, it doesn't, you know, it's not your life. This is part of your life. And when you go home, this continues. So everything that you feel like you're on fire about, that you've learned here, is meant to be taken home with you and to be something that continues to benefit you. We're not trying to just get you away to feel this and then wait for next year, try to feel this again. Yeah. We want you to be equipped for stuff. And then the other component of it, coming from conversations with my therapist, was the idea of like, you can't be on all the time, but being able to strategically understand that, you know, the continuing linearity of your life should accommodate these times where you change the context in order to like empower yourself for the continuing context, you know, the things that are your everyday life. You want to be able to have moments of stepping away so that you can take a look at it. And so when you're retreating to do that in a way that gives you like some restful moments and some peace to be able to do so, I think that's what having the mindset of like, I'm going to go back into that. I'm not here to just run away. I'm here so that I can re-engage with everything that I've decided or that is like the part of my everyday life. And obviously, like, the retreat can motivate change. You know, the clarity of stepping away allows you sometimes to be like, what am I doing there? This is so obvious that I need to stop that. But until you take those moments of retreat, and unless you're taking those retreats with that kind of equipping yourself in mind, it doesn't have that kind of benefit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, man. What I love about that too is it seems like it adds another layer of intentionality behind it.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's like, you know, because it's so easy to just, like you said, just be like, okay, well, we're just going to escape from this for a little while. And hopefully, you know, a handful of margaritas and pina coladas at breakfast will get this out of my system. Yeah. That's one of the things that I've really found that travel is great for is it takes me far enough outside of my day to day to be able to look at things from a 30,000 foot view and say like, okay, which of the things am I stressing about that, like, big picture, not that big of a deal? Yeah. You know, what am I spending too much time on? What should I be spending more time on?
Easier to think about when you're not faced with the screen of the things.
Yeah, because you're not doing it. Yeah. And there was, I mean, really me leaving I wouldn't say the only real job I've ever had, but pretty much conventional job that I had. I was working at this marketing agency, and I've told this story before, but a long story short, started there with one other guy. We grew the company pretty substantially, and I got this really great opportunity to travel with one of our clients that I was like kind of helping manage that account for. And it was awesome. But during that journey of us growing, I started working tons and tons and tons of hours because I wanted to prove that I cared and that I would work like a partner and do all these different things.
These good goals that just end up spiraling out of control.
Right. I mean, it's the points that don't matter that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, right.
And so, you know, I threw a whole summer away. Fitness became difficult to maintain because of how long I was at the office. My relationship was terrible at the time, and like just all the stuff. And I got sent to Europe for a 6-day trade show. And then I tagged on like 2 weeks on the back end of that because I had some friends and family that I was like, I'm just going to go see them. I'm already over here. Let's do this. And what I realized was so much of what I was doing back home was just filler content. Because I was over there and I still had my workload to do during those 2 weeks that I tagged on to the vacation. But I realized that if I sat down in a coffee shop for 3.5 hours of focused work, I got the same amount of shit done that I did when I was sitting there for 10 hours in Red Lodge staring at a brick building across the street because it was obstructing my view of the mountains.
How inspiring.
Yeah. And it was so interesting for me to see that, like, okay, well, then we need to re-examine this. Like,
Yeah,
what the
right.
fuck are we actually doing here?
Right.
And that was the first large domino in me realizing that, like, okay, well, we can just live this life where we can go experience things and still work hard and get a ton of stuff done, but also have some cool life stuff that comes along with it too. And you don't have to throw away all of these other things that you care about just to score points in the I was at the office for a long time game. And
you can't see it from inside the jar, you know?
Yeah, man, it's so tricky. To that point though, as we're kind of getting closer to the end, I'm very curious. You've had a super cool journey on the way here. And I love like how it's been a common theme of just like, I've got passion for art. I'm going to go do this engineering thing. I'm going to come back to art. I'm going to build a full career out of art. With where we're at right now with it, how would you describe the end picture of like your story is written? We're at the final chapter. What does the rest of that story look like? And what's the best version of your story? If you had to describe that.
I'm such a sucker for variety that I think like for it to just be like a collection of the most random, wonderful adventures would really, that would make me feel like I've succeeded on this like business journey to the extent that it's, you know, a goal. It's almost like business is the mechanism, but the point is to just use that as a, what's the word I'm thinking of? Almost like a disguise to get into the room.
Yeah, it's like it's the engine that fuels your life, maybe.
Exactly. Like just adventure dressed up as a business person. Like, oh, cool, I snuck into this. I mean, not just to sneak into things, but to like figure out, okay, you know, the rules of this game. How do I use them to meet the kind of people and get the kind of stories that I want to be able to tell? One of the things that I want to be more directly like focusing my own like marketing efforts and stuff toward as I build this business is, you know, working with industries and people who have a story they know they want to tell and just need like some of that creative juice for some, you know, logos or merch or whatever designs that I can offer through like lettering and design that, you know, further tell that story, that tell it in an even better way. And what I love about that vision for myself is it just puts me in places with people who have that dialed, right? Like who know what story they want to tell. Because then I get to just enjoy their passion and what they're doing. And I think another component of it would be like, if I can look back on the things that I've accomplished as a business and can just like, if I can lose track of people that I'm able to inspire, I think that would be the biggest success. Where I can't, you know, I think that it would be very cool to know that like I've inspired one particular person to do something great, but how much better just to be like, I feel like I've inspired more people than I can count and like left a mark that way. I think that would be very cool. And to just like continue doing what I love doing, but in a public enough way and understanding enough of it to be able to contribute that inspiration. Like, cause I think like one of the antidotes to burnout, you know, is to be freshly re-inspired. I think the imagery is always, you know, a burnout is literally a candle or a flame being extinguished. And then the language of inspiration is often, you know, sparks and igniting something. So if I can just be running around with a little torch and like, I don't know, I think I'm lighting things.
Dan the arsonist.
Yeah, more or less. It's all timely.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no shit. Man, that's so cool. What a cool thing too, to be able to have so many goals that are based out of being in service, right? Being in service to inspiring people, being in service to...
It's because I'm so humble.
Yeah, it has to be. I'm the humblest person I know. Oh, man.
No, that's a good way to put it, though, man. Yeah, I think that's that. I've just seen... I've reaped the benefits of being served by so many people, and now it does feel like giving back. You know, I feel it's an easy cliche to be like, you receive by giving, right? But then to now I'm at this stage in my career, which still feels fairly early, but to be able to look back and be like, okay, I think I've accomplished some of this. I can see how the idea of giving back and the times where I've been able to do that have literally been the most rewarding ones.
That's so huge, man. I love it. Well, for this chapter of your book, how do you describe the chapter that you're in right now? And if you had to give it a title, what would you title it?
I think it would be titled Leveling Up, and then maybe in parentheses, like again or something. It just feels like I'm at a pivoting point of like entering a new phases of opportunity and being confronted with like the reality of like, okay, you've got to level up in all different kinds of ways, but feeling like, you know, I've got the tools, I've got the experience points to spend on it, and I just have to know how to allocate them. That's the Elden Ring player in me coming out right there. Got to spend my runes.
Yeah, it's fresh in the front of the mind for today. Gosh, I miss playing video games.
It's so fun,
man. Well, dude, this was awesome. I think your story is it's inspiring to me, so you can add me to your list of the uncountable inspired people at the end of your book.
Let's go.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate your time and being willing to get on here. So for people who want to find more of your stuff, want to find your work, maybe work with you, where can people get more Dan?
Right now, it's mostly at Instagram. So Dan Drawn Words is the account name. And I'm currently building my company, which is called Destiny Kid Labs, which has almost zero online footprint right now, which is a really funny paradox. Just the joy of like having work for the first year of it that sort of precluded working on it, like just from the marketing standpoint. I'm like, okay, I shouldn't get stressed about this because I'm getting, you know, the goal is being reached. Yeah. But anyway, hopefully by the time, you know, this is published, my goal is to have at least like the website draft out. So Destiny Kid Labs, there's it's based on my initials because I'm a narcissist like that, but that's the goal. That's the thing I'm building. Should be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to see that. I know that we'll be hitting you up for more of our shirts and stuff like that. We get the coolest feedback on everything we put out, and we're like, well, the cool thing about the cool things we do is that Dan does them. So I
love it,
dude. So much gratitude for you, man. Thank you again for taking the time, and we'll do it again sometime.
Cheers.
All right. We love you, everybody. Peace.